Good evening, Lacrosse community. My name's Ryan Berns. I'm the founder of the Lacrosse Leadership Institute. It's our mission to empower all those that love this game of lacrosse to be successful, live the life that you want to live, and utilize the skills that you gain from lacrosse to be successful. I'm so excited and grateful for our guest today, Gordon. He's going to share his experience with lacrosse, the journey that he's had, and explain just how important it is to have the right mental edge moving forward. Gordon, with that, thank you so much for being here. Can you share with our community how you came about with the game lacrosse and where it's taken you so far?
Absolutely, Ryan. Thank you for having me on. My start in the game, I can't imagine it going any other way than what it did. I was born into it. My dad and all of his buddies played at Berns College up in New York. And when they got into the workforce, they wound up moving down into Georgia. They started a men's club program, and shortly after that, him and all of his friends had sons, me being one of them, and they decided to start a youth program. It actually was going to be it was and still is the very first youth program in the state of Georgia, Atlanta Youth Lacrosse. And that started in the early 1990s, and I came into that as maybe like a fourth or a fifth grader. We had 4 teams. We had this mud field. It was just hand-me-down gear and all these jerseys that we reused from year to year. And that's where I got my start, where I gravitated towards playing all the positions, but eventually I landed on close defense, which is where I stayed throughout my playing career. And that's also where I got involved in the administration and the coaching and eventually the long-term refereeing, is since it was a family business. When my dad was out coaching, I would be up in the scores box with my friend Andy, and we would be taking the score and putting up on the scoreboard, and and then get in my dad's truck afterwards, and he'd bring us to go get snow cones or ice cream or something afterwards. But that's how I got started, and continued to really my early to mid 20s, is continuing to work with. That's where I got started, and where the family business continued. And my folks are finally in semi-retirement. They're never going to be fully retired, but we did hand the program off to some close friends of ours. So now my dad does the coaching. My mom does photography, and now I do the officiating.
Well, it sounds like you guys have the family affair when it comes down to lacrosse. I think I may be having a little bit of connection. I just want to make sure, Gordon, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. Video's a little choppy.
Okay. Well, we'll just keep going through it. I'm glad that you can at least hear me. Well, hopefully the internet on my side starts to figure itself out, but thanks for sharing your story. It sounds like the family really started with it. I'd love to ask next, though, what is your pinnacle lacrosse moment, or what are a few of your pinnacle lacrosse moments?
I mean, I could list some state championships. I could list getting to, after 10 years of being an NCAA official, getting to make it into the show and make the playoffs. I did that about 2 years ago, and got to work with some of my mentors on those games and close friends. I could list those things, and I could list, getting to work some really competitive MCLA club playoff games and championships and all this stuff. And, when I was thinking about this answer, when you had sent me those questions earlier, I realized that none of them are really true. And this is another kind of mindset thing. I've read about every book on officiating that I can find. There aren't many out there. And Kerry Frazier, who was an NHL official, has a great thing, because somebody asked me, he was like, what's your favorite moment? Like, what's the most memorable game? And he said, and this is a guy who's done NHL championship after championship. He's like, you know what? Quite honestly, it's my next game. And I read that years ago, and that's been a mentality of mine now that I continue to go with, is, I can reach for the pinnacles, and that'd be great, and I could put a feather in my cap. However, that doesn't really add to my enjoyment of the game or to officiating as an avocation. So for me, whether it is it was a whole slew of high school games at a tournament down in Peachtree City Saturday and this past Sunday. tomorrow it could be a U11 game, and that's going to be my favorite moment of that. It's a forward-looking bit, but it does help me stay in the present and truly enjoy what it is that I'm doing in the game at that moment. So I've had high moments in lacrosse. I'm happy about those, and I try not to get too wrapped up in them, if that makes much sense to you.
It makes a ton of sense. And I think that's a sentiment that a lot of the individuals that I've already had conversations with have shared. It's about being where your feet are right now, being present in the moment. I love that you're looking forward nonstop. And I think that I can understand that probably relates to your story as well of really what you've had to share on the mental side of things. And I think our conversation will eventually lead there. Before we do, though, the last question I want to make sure that we ask is, what does leadership mean to you?
It's a very deep question, and it's one that as I'm in shifting careers into line work, where I've moved from, I did that because I wanted to be in a space where I would grow professionally, but also the atmosphere was very much like officiating, small crews, doing a job, and trying to do a quality work on that. And the biggest thing in terms of being a leader in my mind is the ability to learn how to follow first, to always have that available to you. When I referee, I'm not always the crew chief. I'm not always the R. And sometimes I'm the umpire, sometimes I'm the field judge, sometimes I'm the chief bench official. And the role in each of those is to support the entire crew. So it's a forward-thinking look of what is our objective, what is our mission, and then what is the manner in which we are doing to get that, and holding everybody accountable to that driving goal and the manner in which you're doing it. That does not have to always be you in the leadership position. That can be from anywhere. And that's probably the biggest thing I found in officiating is, and I had a gentleman, we did a ref training 2-3 weeks ago. This guy's first year as an official, and he says, what is my style going to be? What do I have to do to improve? And I'm like, you're just starting out. You just did a field game. I'm glad your head is there. And I only want you to focus on how can I be the best umpire? How can I be the best partner, the best crewmate possible? Because that will allow you to see what you need when you are in that leadership position, what qualities you want to draw out from those in a subordinate position to you. But one of my great mentors, Chris Clark, he's from upstate New York, did when the World Championships were out in Colorado, he did the gold medal game, one of the officials out there representing the United States. He's got a great thing. He says, when it's 3-4 gentlemen, 5 for a world game out on a crew, and he's the referee, he leads the pregame and he does a coin flip. And he says, after that, we're all equal. And we all have to do our part to make the game as good as it can be for the players and the coaches there. So that's been a mentality I've tried to keep on that bit is I'm no better or worse than anybody else on the crew.
I love that humility that you have with it. And I think that the great leaders that we speak to and we hear from, they have that humility and they know that they have to put others first in order to accomplish the mission of the whole. And that's that whole idea of the servant leader. So thank you for echoing that, Gordon. And I can understand why you've been asked by US Lacrosse to continue to take on huge roles and train so many officials that make a huge impact in the game all around the world because of that idea and that mission that you preach and are able to really represent for everyone. Now, I'm not sure if those of us in Arizona necessarily understand what it means to be an official at the level you are, or the impact that US Lacrosse has, and also what lacrosse has had in terms of impact on your life. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about how lacrosse saves your life?
Yes, so about a little over 2 years ago, an article came out in U.S. Lacrosse Magazine that was a year in the making with our editor and chief publicist there at U.S. Lacrosse headquarters, called "Lacrosse Saves My Life: A Story of Friendship and Survival," and it was a really an outpouring of my soul to the lacrosse community, and a space that I was grateful for because this is my community, number one, and I got to share how lacrosse has helped me deal with my major depressive disorder. I'm a depressive, also my generalized anxiety disorder, and on a very extreme side and scary side for many folks to hear is suicidal ideation and several attempts at suicide in my early to mid 20s. And I do like to tell folks is like, hey, I don't mean to say this to scare anyone. And I do believe that we can talk about scary things without being scared by them. Right. So to be able to step back a little bit from what it is we're thinking about or worrying about, and let's just have a discussion, see what we can learn on that front. And that has been for me, just like I've learned lacrosse as a player, as a coach, as an official, I've had to learn my own brain and learn all the ins and outs of major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and where these suicidal thoughts come from in order to be able to battle them. From a sports angle, I look at this corner of my brain as my opponent. And it used to be very adversarial. Now we're a little bit more cooperative. Not all the time, me and my depression. Sometimes he's a real pain. More often time, it's kind of like just cordial adversaries. Like we respect one another, and sometimes we do get out a little bit. But I've learned the strengths and weaknesses of that dark part of my head. But I've also learned my own strengths to be able to battle that. And lacrosse has been a huge part of that. Number one, because it's given me a community of people that I can rely on to check in on me and who can keep me accountable on checking in with myself. That's number one, right? That biggest piece. The number two bit is that it's a distraction from my own mind. When I'm getting ready for a field on a game, whether it's high school, college, or little kid, bobblehead lacrosse, I am only focused on that game. And I could have had the worst possible day ever with the worst night's sleep and a horrible diet and nothing. But for an hour and a half, 2, 3 hours, I can just do this game. And that is enough of a decompression to get out of my own head for a little bit and get some exercise at the same time, get activity. And then I can be like, okay, am I really feeling this bad? What can I do to care for myself, to have a better next hour, next day, and so on. So those two things in concert are what keep me alive. And it's just very funny because I tell folks when I do my coaching workshops, I hated playing lacrosse because I couldn't enjoy it because I was so worked up about my own degree of performance, whether I made a mistake or not, or whether I did something 100% right or not. I couldn't enjoy it. And then I got into officiating where nobody believes you do anything right. And I love it. And so it's this weird thing for officiating where it's just this odd, that little bit of mental switch is enough for me to put my perfectionism on the shelf and just focus on what's in front of me.
I can imagine that that's a pretty big shift as well, and something where it can be really hard to overcome in the first place. And we're so glad that you have found a way to love the game and give back. I do want to ask another question that is more on the serious side of things, because I believe it is truly important, especially because there aren't as many role models like you that are sharing something so vulnerable. So first and foremost, thank you for doing this. If we have youth players, high school, college players, or even as coaches, are there any warning signs of someone having these types of mind thoughts? And also, what can we do if you are a player in this situation? What are some things that you'd like to share or that you could share with our community?
Certainly. So just so I'm clear on that one. So what can somebody do for themselves if they're thinking those thoughts, and what can somebody else do in support of?
Exactly. Yes, please.
Okay. So I'll take the in support of. That's a slightly easier one to start with. So if you're concerned with a friend, with a family member, with a teammate, if you're a coach worried about a younger player, the first thing on this one, and I have to harp on this because this is probably the most important piece to it, is you have to approach any conversation with an individual you're concerned with is non-judgmental as possible. Biggest thing. The idea here is to provide, there's a reason the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, where I'm a field advocate, volunteer, their logo is a life preserver. The life preserver does nothing but float. It's just there, right? The other person is there to grab onto it. So that's why that is their logo. And so you got to put yourself in that mindset. You are there to hold space and not give advice. Okay, because what's happened to me before, and what I've certainly heard in quote unquote horror stories, is I feel depressed. Well, think better, happier thoughts. And inside my mind, because I'm cynical and I have dark humor, I'm like, well, of course, thank you, wise person who has been brought before me to give me this wonderful life advice that I couldn't get off of any Instagram post anywhere. No. Don't, life is worth living, not to the person thinking those thoughts. So those comments do not help. You're there to listen. So shut up. So that's number one. Number two is you need to ask explicit questions. This is where people get a little bit frightened. And this is for a good reason. The fear is that you're going to give somebody the thought to act on whatever they may be thinking, or that you're going to give them a thought to act on something they hadn't been thinking. They're already thinking those thoughts if there are, or they're in that ballpark. So you're not giving them any new information. And the research by NAMI, by AFSP, by the CDC bears none of those fears out whatsoever. Having and asking these explicit conversations: are you thinking about harming yourself or somebody else? Are you thinking about ending your life by suicide? Those explicit questions do a very important function. They leave somebody, I'll use myself as an example, no room to run, so to speak. The only answers are yes, in which case it's, okay, how can we help you? Can we get you to a therapist? Would you like to go to a hospital? I'll drive you, I'll stay with you here. Let's go out to dinner, anything, right, on that space. Number two, if they say no, okay, cool. Then we have a deeper conversation and just kind of what's going on in life, and that can help out on that front. Or they say nothing, which is as much of an answer as yes or no, right? So by asking explicit questions when somebody is in a suicide crisis, this is suicide intervention, is you're just trying to create space for this person to get out of this crisis mindset. And the more time and space you can give, the drastic amount of decrease there is in that person's level of suicidality and potential lethality to themselves. So that's in support. So non-judgmental, ask explicit questions, 1 and 2. For yourself, on the other side, this is the harder question. And I know this because I was an athlete, and I didn't want to admit weakness, let alone to myself, certainly not to my parents, not to my teammates, not to my coaches. These are individuals who I felt relied on me in some form or fashion. And I needed to be able to, I called it my little black ball. I've since 15 in high school, I poured every awful, miserable thought, feeling, and emotion into this little hole in my chest that just, it was like it felt like a neutron star. It was the densest possible part of my body. I was always curled up and physically carrying this weight of my thoughts. And I did that instead of speaking because I didn't understand what was going on in my head, number one. So that's a better plus for individuals listening to this podcast, listening to this interview, but also the youth right now, is that there's a general consciousness raising of what's going on with mental health worldwide. So that's a good thing, right? But now this is why I have these conversations, modeling this type of behavior and explaining why, me stumbling around in the dark on my own nearly ended my life, right? So I didn't have the vocabulary to explain what I was thinking, or even to believe that what I was thinking was abnormal in any sense of the word, or at the very least, like not healthy. Maybe that's a slightly nicer way to put that. Is it didn't serve, my life goals and my continued existence. So as hard as it is, it's to reach out to somebody. It's to just say, I need help, or I need somebody to listen to me. That doesn't have to be parents. It doesn't have to be a coach. It can be a teammate. It can be a teacher, school therapist, guidance counselor, YMCA coach, receptionist at your school, right? Anybody that you have some kind of relationship with that you know cares about you and will, like I said earlier, hold space for you in a critical moment. That is, you, as hard, as painful as it is, and it's part of the unfortunate side effect of several mental illnesses, is this internal shame, not just societal, but also from the illness of you need to keep this private. That's a false belief because of that illness. And if you can find a way within yourself to reach out, you've drastically increased your likelihood of having a better life immediately and long term.
Wow. Gordon, thank you so much for sharing those ideas right now, and not just ideas, but actionable items for us all to take, whether we're having those thoughts or we have a teammate, friend, loved one that's going through that. I know that we can focus and really on ourselves of not being judgmental and creating that space to be that life preserver and to just listen. And I think that's something where empathy is one of the biggest things that we preach as leaders, is because you have to be able to connect with people on that emotional side if we're ever going to make any difference in one another's lives. And that's so huge. Now, I know you've weaved around and done a lot of different things, but now you spend a lot of time focusing on mental agility. Can you share a little bit more about that with our group?
Sure. Absolutely. And thank you for asking. So mental agility is my public organization that's developed out of having my story go out on U.S. Lacrosse and Referee magazine, and as a way for me to continue my advocacy work, but also a way for me to continue my own personal therapy. So I write weekly. I do weekly newsletters or biweekly newsletters. I do different videos. I put up tips, techniques, different things. I've got some for high schoolers right now, sports officials, of course, and working professionals. And I'm building out those libraries of, again, actionable tasks and items, techniques people can use in their day-to-day, all things that I've done, that I've tried. And I just report back on kind of what I find is valuable. I do coaching talks, I do team talks where I will take people through how the brain works, what our stress response is, how a lacrosse game perfectly mimics everything about the stress response. So being able to deal with that better than the other team or the other player you're going against in the fourth quarter, if everything else remains equal, the person who is better off in dealing with that stress in that moment is going to be able to make better long-term decisions. This is the idea of the last 20 seconds and you're up by a goal and you're the attackman, and then you have the ball that you're not driving to goal, that you're trying to kill the clock, right? You're not trying to go to the cage, so it's having that mental space. And I call it mental agility because, as I've said in many coaching clinics, I don't disagree or devalue mental toughness. I simply disagree with how it has been taught and coached, even to myself, and I've done this as well. Mental toughness is fantastic when you know what the heck you're doing. Professional athletes, collegiate athletes for the most part, some degree of high school athletics, depending on the program, they are so well coached and they have so much experience, they know what to do at critical moments of the game, and grit is necessary. Cool, awesome, good on you. A 9-year-old doesn't know that. They can't. They've got too much running through their mind to begin with, right? So it doesn't fit. So you need to be able, in my mind, and when I do this with coaches or with teams as well at any age level, is teaching folks just how the brain works at different ages and how to work within the limitations of a developing mind in an individual and in a group setting. So the idea becomes not mental toughness. The idea becomes is strategize, is being able to see the stuff coming at you and be able to bob and dodge to the other side and attack it from a different direction, just like you would physically, the same thing that you can do mentally, which is why my tagline is move your mind. And so that the idea is, by the time this player, if this young man or young woman wants to go to college and play at that next level, or now wants to go into professional ranks at any sporting event that they want to do, whatever that may be, is that they now have two things that going for them. They likely have developed that degree of mental toughness just because of the sport they're playing, right? That's going to happen, and especially if they're invested in that, they're going to get to that route. They're going to find that mental toughness. And now they have the ability to not beat their head against the wall when things aren't going their way, either internally or externally, because of these techniques of mental agility, of dealing with the stress response, of dealing with negative intrusive thoughts, of dealing with the environment. They can maneuver mentally in a better space, and now they're much more likely to succeed in whatever sport or activity they're going with. So that's the purpose, that's the goal, that's the general philosophy that I have with mental agility.
And I think that's so critical. Oftentimes we face, well, I'll call them breakdowns, where we're trying to accomplish something and we break down and we face that wall. The big thing is breaking through and ultimately making it on the other side. And mental agility lets you just to go around the wall.
Go around the wall. Yeah, sometimes, that wall might be 18 feet thick. You're not going to bang your head against that thing and get through it. I don't care what. So mental agility, if you need to go get a backhoe mentally to go tear the freaking thing down, that's where I'm coming from on that end, because I spent all of my playing career and the early part of my reffing career just wearing out that wall physically, and stepping back and being able to be like, oh, I can just go around it. Okay, cool. Let's do that, and not stress unnecessarily.
And I think oftentimes we need that outside perspective who's looking at you banging your head against the wall, and they go, dude, what's going on? Go around. But you need to be willing to accept outside help. You need to be open for suggestions, have that humility to be able to open up yourself, to be vulnerable. And that is absolutely amazing, Gordon, that's what you're focused on. Would you say that's where all your focus is right now, or what all are you focusing on right now, and how can we help you with what you're focusing on?
Yes. So right now, what I'm mostly looking to do, as much as I can, as my schedule allows, is what I call mental agility coaching workshops or team workshops. So it's all virtual. I do a version of this, but I dive more. I've got some good visual aids and a lot of activities. This is not a sit in front of your screen and just listen to me drone on. I don't like that anyway. My talks are, even when I'm in person, is very engaging. So we'll get folks moving, because that sparks some different types of thinking. And the idea here, and it's the same thing when the last coaching conference I went to was the Urban Lacrosse Alliance. They did a talk last year in Maryland. We had about 70 coaches in the room, and we took them through different ways in which they can boost their players' confidence before a game, ways in which they can speak to their players at halftime if things are not going well, the importance of recognizing body position and subtle physical cues in your players and yourself as well, and just explaining why a youth brain up to 25, I'm talking 25 and below as a youth brain here, is not the same as an adult brain. So you can't coach kids at any level the same way that you think. And so that's where I try to bring about a degree of awareness. And so far, the responses from the coaches I've had on that have been very rewarding, because they're like, this changes everything I'm thinking about coaching for the better, because it's giving them, again, some more strategy behind what it is that they're doing, because they're doing all the physical stuff. They're doing all the practice planning stuff. They're doing all the things they need to do. But they've never had to really worry about this mental stuff beyond like putting up a motivational quote on the team email or Facebook page, whatever that is, right? So this is taking that next, in my mind, logical step for improved competition at any level of play. So if anybody is interested in those workshops or any of the videos and techniques that I have up on my website now, you can go to mentallyagile.com, or you can email me. Again, all my contact information is on mentallyagile.com. I'm also all over Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter, Mentally Agile. I'll pop right up. My door's always open. I love talking this stuff. I love talking lacrosse, and always excited to see where those conversations can go, and who then I can add to my growing lacrosse community.
Well, Gordon, we thank you so much for allowing us to have this conversation with you. We'll make sure to put you in the tag on the YouTube page of everything that you're involved in right now, so that people know where they can reach out to you. And thank you for really being a beacon of hope for all of us as we continue to progress and try to empower the youth to be successful, look to be successful ourselves. You're really a great guy, and thank you for taking the time again.
Well, thank you, man. My pleasure. Thank you again for having me.